More than once, I've been brought in to replace a leader that executives had labeled as difficult. The difference between me and the previous leader is that I knew how to say no without saying no. Two leaders raising the exact same concern to the same executive, but because I knew how to frame no, I was pulled into bigger conversations and was eventually promoted. Now in this video, I'll show you how the most effective leaders push back without damaging trust, how to communicate upward in a way that executives actually respect, and how to influence what work gets done without ever having to say no. Most leaders rely on gut feelings and emotions. I relied on data because data tells an evidence-based objective story. I've been on both sides of this conversation. I've been the leader doing the pushing back, and I've been the executive hearing it. That perspective matters because the way pushback is intended and the way it's interpreted are rarely the same thing. When executives hear a flat no or hear complaints about burnout without context, they don't hear that you have a capacity issue. They hear an emotionally overwhelmed leader. That immediately reframes the situation for them. The focus shifts to the leader and not the work, not whether the workload fits within capacity, but how the leader is experiencing that pressure. That puts the executive into problem-solving mode around the wrong problem. Over time, the leader accepts the work anyway, feeling completely unheard. And eventually, something important falls through the cracks. And when that happens, the executive question is inevitable. Why wasn't this risk raised earlier? Now, from that leader's perspective, the risk was raised. They talked about overload, they talked about burnout, and they flagged the team strain. But those are intangible signals. They don't translate into clarity that an executive can take action on. So while the leader believed that they were raising risk, they never framed it in a way that made the risk or the cost of inaction visible to the executive. At senior levels, leaders are managing strategic company level goals, risks, and trade-offs. And when information is incomplete or unclear, they have to act based on the data that they actually have. A refusal without context doesn't clarify anything. It prompts the executive to respond to the emotional signals because that's what's been presented to them. That's why capable leaders can get labeled difficult or not ready. Not because they were wrong about the team not having capacity, but because they didn't make an evidence-based argument and they didn't surface trade-offs. A blunt no or leading with emotions without context sends unintended signals that the leader is protecting themselves or that the leader doesn't understand the broader business context or urgency. They don't understand that they're creating friction, which leads to more work for the executive who now feels the need to step in. This is why two leaders can raise the same issue and get very different outcomes. The difference isn't courage, it's translation. This exact approach is how I went from an entry-level role to an executive role in 2 years. Not because I was the smartest or the hardest worker, but because every conversation I had with senior leaders was grounded in data. I talked about capacity, goals, and trade-offs. While other leaders were saying yes to everything and eventually dropping the ball, I was showing executives risk and the resulting impact if we took on new work without priorities or trade-offs. And because I spoke their language, they saw me as a strategic partner, not as a bottleneck. They never felt the need to step in and fix my team because I gave them the data to make informed decisions. The result was that I took the express elevator to the top, to an executive role, while others stayed stuck. Now let me give you another example. A mid-level operations leader was asked to absorb a massive new initiative right after a round of layoffs. Most people would have said, "We can't. We don't have the capacity. The team is already drowning." But she didn't say any of that. She responded with data. If we take this on with the current team, our release timeline moves out by 3 weeks. If speed is the priority, we would need to pause either onboarding improvements or customer reporting to make room. Which of these is the higher priority? Now notice that she didn't say no. She made the impact and the trade-offs visible. She didn't absorb the risk. She put the decision back on the executive. And guess what? The executive reprioritized the work. She started getting pulled into planning conversations earlier because she made the challenges, impact, and trade-offs visible. Compare that to the leader who just absorbs it all. They think they're being a team player, but really, they're unintentionally hiding risks that they were never meant to carry. When something eventually falls through the cracks, it becomes a crisis. And not just for them, it impacts other teams, budgets, and company goals. That's when executives step in, timelines get compressed, and urgency spikes. The leader ends up with 10 times more anxiety than if they had led the conversation with data up front. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what kind of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be labeled difficult, or do you want to be promotion ready? Because the words you choose matter. If you're a leader who was never trained and feel like you're struggling to keep your head above water, it's not your fault. It's a skill set gap. I teach this exact translation skill in my high-performing leadership mastermind, where we treat leadership as a craft based on real-world experience, not theory. If you're interested, the link is in the description.